We're going to be talking about a very famous idea from Joseph Campbell, which is follow your bliss. You probably have heard this. It's like one of those famous quotes that just permeates all culture. But what does it actually mean? And how does one actually follow their bliss? My whole reason for turning this into a live stream that we're going to discuss is that I think we're getting worse at following our bliss. And that's no good, because following your bliss just sounds like a thing that you would want to do, just on principle in that way. But also, I think it's important for a healthy culture that people be aligned with what they actually genuinely care about in the positive sense, not just what you dislike, what you hate. And considering that now we have this whole phenomenon where people hate follow someone or they hate watch something, follow your bliss has never been a more appropriate piece of advice. And I think it's actually become kind of a warning in our modern times, where it's so much easier for us to spend our attention on things that we dislike. And while that is part of caring about something, is the things that you don't like, it's not your bliss. And I think that's what is such a beautiful distinction in Joseph Campbell's phrasing, is that it's not just what you care about, because you can care about things in the negative sense. It's what makes you feel alive, what makes you feel in tune with something powerful, transcendent, bigger than yourself, and makes you happy to exist. That's following your bliss. So in this live stream, we're going to go deeper into that idea of what following your bliss actually means. And I also want to discuss the costs of not following your bliss, because it is more costly than you might think. And of course, if you consider the fact that following your bliss is meant to be like live out your life's purpose, what could have a higher cost than not living your life in a way that is truly aligned with what you value most, what you are best suited to pursue in life? So if anything, this is like the most high stakes shit that you can ever imagine. Follow your bliss. And it's funny because it's this quaint phrase, which of course, that's exactly how it would be. It seems like a cliche. It seems like this, flippant little poetic thing that doesn't mean that much, when actually it's the highest stakes thing ever. So we'll talk about the cost of not following your bliss, both on an individual level, and I will hypothesize on what happens on the collective level when too many people aren't pursuing what they actually are meant to pursue. And then we'll talk about identifying your bliss. How do you actually follow your bliss? What does it mean? What does it look like to do that? How do you course correct when you find yourself not doing that? And to wrap up, we'll talk about the more woo-woo side of things, but it's not actually that woo-woo, because it's a kind of like secular spirituality that is accessible through this concept of following your bliss, which I think is really prescient, because you have all this, look, and I'm not a hater on those that are religious. I think it's great if it works for you, but it's not going to work for a lot of people, increasingly so. And Joseph Campbell actually talks about this. I have this book here, which is partly what I am referencing as we speak. And I'll read a little bit from this at a different point in regards to how he talks about following your bliss and where he gets this idea from. But he himself acknowledges that one of the important aspects of religion is that it explained the world to people. It told people, how did the sun get up in the sky? Why is the sky so big? How do we come into existence? Why do we die? What happens after we die? And now that we had the scientific revolution and we were able to answer these questions and find out that the myths that we were once using to answer these questions weren't correct, it then knocks a leg out of the chair upon which we were sitting in religion. That is one of the core ideas of like what religion does for us. It's something that we turn to explain the world. And so now that we can't explain the world with it, sure, we can turn to it for morality, for a sense of purpose, a sense of community, but it's not explaining the world. And for a lot of people, most humans really, we care about understanding the world. And so we have turned more to the intellectual, rational, fact-driven, scientific way of explaining the world. But of course, we still have that like gap between the religious instinct and the desire for myth and now this new way of explaining the world. So not everybody is going to be capable of just doubling down on religion as their way to find a path in life. And I am one of those people. And so what I really appreciate about Campbell's concept of following your bliss is that it has a spiritual component to it, but it's not one that requires you adopt faith claims that you may really not feel inclined to adopt. And so I think this is taking us in the direction that we're increasingly going to have to reckon with, which is, what do we do with the need for a spiritual experience for the things that religion has provided us with, when we can't believe in the faith claims of religion that helped us have that spiritual experience? And so the idea of secular spirituality, of a spiritual experience that doesn't require these kind of faith claims that have been disproven, is really where we need to start going, as opposed to just like what I see a lot of, which is just, you should just believe. And I'm sorry, that's not going to work. That's just not going to work. I don't know why I don't know why we've taken that detour of being like, if we just made woke people Christians, everything would be fine. It's like, that's not going to happen for so many reasons. So better that we solve the actual problem than just wishing we lived in the past where people were more religious. It ain't gonna come back like that. So let's get moving on this idea, because I love, for those of us that don't have like a kind of, normal religious practice, I don't think that means that you have to just be like, oh, religion's dumb, peace out, that's not for me. On the contrary, I think that is also a mistake in many ways, because it cuts us off from something that's really deeply meaningful as a part of the human experience, which is that kind of like, I don't want to say sixth sense, but like that transcendent experience, that connection to something higher than us, bigger than us. That's sought it out for almost our entire existence. Like there's clearly something there that is fulfilling for us. And so rather than just kind of ignore that, I think it's smarter to try to actually solve the problem for those of us that don't feel connection to faith claims. That doesn't mean that you don't have to have a spiritual life and that there's nothing redeemable about religion. On the contrary, I think this is one of the reasons that Jordan Peterson was gained popularity, was because he showed people that there are so many more facets to religion than just the faith claims. And that was like one of the biggest revelation to me, was like, oh, that's right, they're stories. And like, we learn through stories. Story is a technology. It's a way of conveying meaning and passing down culture and values. So we don't need to just throw out all of religion because we don't believe in some of the like faith claims that we in a scientific world now have the ability to say that there's no proof that this could have happened. And so trying to bridge that gap isn't necessarily the only way to gain the benefits of like our spiritual inclinations as a human species. Okay, so let me just quickly do some housekeeping. Welcome to The Black Sheep. This is The Black Sheep Live. I am Salome Siboney, co-founder of The Black Sheep, writer, artist, and speaker. We're going to be doing a lot of speaking in The Black Sheep Live. This is a continual live stream, and so you can stay updated on it if you make sure that you are subscribed to The Black Sheep. And we've got a lot of cool things there for you that are similar to this. Like if you want to know more about this kind of idea of like, using stories as a technology to find meaning, you can go back to my previous live stream where I talk about the way that our desire for myth, our desire for narrative as a way to make sense of the world infiltrates our political discourse and like warps the way that we end up looking at the world when we have so much information being thrown at us and we are unable to keep up with it all. Okay, I am going to quickly do some housekeeping here because I need to make sure that I'm actually streaming on these platforms that I'm supposed to be streaming on. Nope, looks like we have a lot of problems here, guys. All right, we're just gonna do a stream on Substack then, because I know I've got Substack, I know I've got Instagram. This is not easy. Jake has set up a whole studio situation here, so this is the first time that I have tried to do it on myself, and it's an absolute disaster. It's not working anywhere. Oh Lord. All right, well, please do leave comments in the live stream chat because I can see those. I'll be checking them. And I want to know if this idea of follow your bliss is something that you've heard of and something that you found value in, because I think it's a really interesting thing. So sorry for the Twitter fam. They're getting left out of this live stream. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the costs of not following your bliss. So this is something that I think is a really deep idea. It's not just like, oh, well, obviously, if you don't live a purpose-driven life, you're not going to have a fulfilling life. Yes, that is the case. But I think there's something deeper to that, which is if you want to be a good and functional person, a person that impacts the lives of the people around you in a positive way, you have to live your life well. And this is actually kind of an inspiring idea because I think I have found that there's this pressure, right? Like I want to live my life well. I want to live a fulfilling life. There's all these things that I want to do and I want to make sure I'm doing them well. And that's a lot of pressure. And it's a lot of self-focus. And that kind of self-focus can quickly devolve into just neuroticism and self-absorption and this like fixation on I have to be this way and I need to do these things. What can be a healthier way to push yourself toward following your bliss and doing the things that you know you need to do to live that kind of a constructive life is actually to remove the focus from yourself as the motivation and take the focus outward. So rather, instead of living a good life for your own sake because you want one, you can live a good life for the sake of the people around you, your parents, your children, your friends, your community members, your partner. All of these people benefit massively from you following your bliss, living a life that is aligned with what you actually care about, as opposed to just getting kind of like swept by the current of the culture and going through the motions. When you live that life that is truly in alignment with what you care about and you push yourself to do that, it is so beneficial for the people around you. And that can be so much more motivating for us to remove the focus from ourselves and our like neurotic desire to be the best and to do things that I need to do. And I have all this thing that I need to get done. And to just remember, well, wait, part of the reason that I do these things isn't for myself, but because it makes me a better partner when I am more pleased with what I've done throughout the day, as opposed to like wasting my day on my phone or like not going to the gym or just like eating unhealthy food as a way to cope when I'm stressed. That is something that like puts my partner in this unpleasant, like uninspiring proximity. And rather, like, isn't it nice to be in proximity with someone who's winning, who's actually pushing themselves towards what they care about, who's proud of themselves because they're doing that, who's doing things that, like, they actually genuinely enjoy, whether it's making time for some hobby that they really like or doing things in their career that are important to them. These things aren't actually just for us. And this is, like, really tied in with the idea of selfishness or self-interest as it's thought of in the objectivist, like, Ayn Rand sense, which is selfishness really isn't as selfish as we often think it is. Self-interest, doing things that are good for you, truly good for you, objectively so, is good for other people. And this predates Rand. Aristotle also had this idea. I can't remember his particular phrasing of it, but it's something akin to that same idea that what's good for you, truly, is good for others. Because naturally, other people benefit from a productive, constructive, healthy member of their society, family, community. And so that is one of these things that, like, the cost of not following your bliss is a cost that everyone pays. It's not just a cost that you pay. So I don't know if maybe the problem is pressure. That might not be alleviating the pressure, but it does alleviate some of the whatever, I'll just do it tomorrow. Yeah, you can put it off tomorrow because you're bargaining with yourself, but what about your kids? What about your partner? What about your family, the people around you? Can they afford for you to continue putting off the thing that would make you a better you, a better community member, a better family member? So that is one of the costs. The other cost, I think, is Campbell calls it a wasteland existence, which is pretty hardcore. And of course includes carrying regret and feeling disconnected from your authentic self. And so all of these things are not rocket science, right? If you don't do the thing in your life that you feel most alive when you're doing, most proud of yourself, most called to do, you waste your life. That's really what it is. And that's a scary thought. And so why I talk about the costs of not following your bliss is because I want to dispel the notion that following your bliss is some kind of hedonistic, oh, I'm just doing whatever's fun for me, this idea. It's really not that. And Campbell explicitly dispelled those misunderstandings later on in his career when he realized that people were misunderstanding it to be this way. It has nothing to do with just pure hedonism. On the contrary, it's very much in this Aristotelian idea that become a great person because that's good for you, yes, but it's good for everyone around you too. It's good for the world. And so the costs of not following your bliss are actually extraordinarily high. And it makes it clear that this is not just some quaint Target kitchen sign, follow your bliss, it is life or death in some sense. So then how do you do it? How do you actually follow your bliss? And that, I think, is the bigger question. Once you get away from misunderstanding what follow your bliss means, what do you actually do in order to follow your bliss? And so Campbell has various suggestions for doing that. And I'm going to read a short list and then we can discuss those more. So identifying your bliss, basically pay attention to what captures your attention naturally. Notice what makes time seem to disappear when you're doing it. Identify subjects or activities that energize you rather than drain you. Recognize experiences that give you a sense of being, quote unquote, in the zone. And follow what makes your heart beat faster with excitement, what you actually feel more enthusiastic about. So this is kind of a basic guideline, right? And immediately you can see how this is different from watching Netflix, hanging out on the couch, sleeping in late, just kind of doing the same things over and over that are comfortable and easy. Those are not the things that are going to make you feel enthusiastic, make you feel like you're in the zone, or your attention gravitates toward naturally. Those are comfortable things. And that's the kind of mistake that leads to that misunderstanding of the concept follow your bliss as being just a permission slip for hedonism. On the contrary, it's often hedonism that gets in the way of following your bliss. And so when you think of these things, I think now is a good time to pause as you listen to this live stream and reflect as you take in this information to think, what actually makes me feel that way? What makes me feel alive? What makes me excited? What makes me feel enthusiastic? What is the thing that I continually get pulled towards? And every time that I come back to it, I realize that's right, I love this thing. That is potentially the thing that you should spend more time with. And it's not necessarily that, I guess I have to quit my job and become a musician now or something. That's not necessarily the case. But maybe you should set aside more time to practice music or to listen to music or to go to concerts. I don't think follow your bliss necessarily has to be as a career, though that may make sense. And Campbell also talks about the mistake that follow your bliss is somehow going to make you money. On the contrary, your bliss might be backpacking across the country and becoming a monk who are famously poor because all they do is do nothing and meditate. So following your bliss could lead to the opposite of making money. It might mean that you end up like in the local monastery living on alms. So that is some of the guidelines for identifying your bliss. And so I want to think a little bit more about that in terms of actually doing it. Because one of the obstacles that I see that we have to following our bliss now is the fact that it's so easy to go into other avenues more than ever because there's so much to do. There's so much that's distracting us at any given time. It's amazing. I mean, like, I'm always thinking about the period of time that's like the 1800s and the 1700s. I just like always gravitate towards this time because I'm like, imagine what it felt like to not have electronic devices. When you were in your house, you were in your house. There wasn't a TV on. There wasn't music playing in the background that wasn't actively being made by someone. You weren't on your phone. Whatever you were doing was done in this kind of more present state because there just wasn't that high stimulation, distracting kind of technology that we have now. And I don't know if you've ever been to these kind of like old historic houses where they preserve the house of someone that was like living there in the 1800s and they're these small wooden houses and it's like, oh, some whatever like soldier lived here and here's the house. I love those things because I'll go into them and just be like, this is exactly how this house probably felt, because it would not have had like a TV. There wouldn't have been people on their phone in it. There wouldn't have been this kind of like busyness. You could be busy doing things, but there was never this extra layer of things going on. You weren't able to be reached with new information from some other place unless a person came to bring you that or you had a letter. That was it. Now, the way that technology works, our phones, our computers, our radios, our TVs, they're all providing us constant streams of information from places that we aren't in. And so it's like we're in two places at the same time. And that is, of course, like incredibly distracting. And so the ability to be so distracted and so kind of like having this atmosphere of buzzingness, like it's just like there's always stuff going on. It's so easy to ignore and to just not even feel the pull towards what would be your bliss, the thing that you actually genuinely care about the most, because you can just get so busy, so distracted. And this is my concern. It's that we've never been more distracted. It's so easy now as a society to just kind of like be going through the motions constantly and be reacting constantly. You're always getting new information to react to. There are so few times where you're just kind of like sitting at peace in the present, just fully kind of there without, oh, I've got to do this, or oh, I've got a phone call, or like, oh, the TV is on, or there's these things I got to do, or like, oh, I'm just taking a break before I start doing things again. We're just so busy. Everything moves so quickly now. And so this makes it so much harder to identify what it is that really deeply calls to you. And I think that's actually pretty scary, because I personally don't know how far that goes. Like, what really happens if you have a culture of people who are kind of like all addicted to their phones or something? Because we're going to reach that level of smartphone addiction, I'm pretty sure, where we just have this like epidemic of distraction, of like total distraction and disconnection from the present reality. It's a very strange thing. And like, I deal with it myself, because now it's just like, I don't know, it's everywhere I look. It seems like I can't get away from it if I open my computer or my TV. It's so weird. And it's like, I work in social media and I work in content creation. Like, I'm writing, I'm publishing things constantly, I'm promoting things constantly. So it's really hard for me to even just do my work and not get kind of like placed into that information stream. It's hard for me to just be like, here's the promotion, I'm running, like, don't tell me what happened today, I don't want to know any news. Like, as soon as I open my feed to post my promotion, I'm like, here's the work that I did. It's like, this happened, that happened, this happened. It's just immediate. Like, I'm not even intentionally consuming this. And then of course, as soon as I inadvertently consume that information, I'm pulled away from what I'm doing, from the moment I'm in. And now I've been given this information that's like in my head. What am I supposed to do with that? Like, I've got to think about it now. Now I've got like to make this effort to put that information down. And that's not easy. I think there's some research that shows it takes about 16 minutes since you focus on one thing to refocus on the thing that you were initially focused on. That's some bad news for those of us that work in media, where we have to open our phones or our emails or whatever, where we can be reached with new information when we're just trying to do one task. So I believe that we are in this kind of moment of peak distraction in a way that impacts us and influences where we spend our attention. And we have a negativity bias. That's like another research-backed finding about how human psychology works. We are prone to gravitate towards what's negative. And so you're already fighting against that normal biology in trying to follow what makes you feel alive, what makes you feel enthusiastic, because negativity is so much more attention getting. And then you have the like distilled negativity of social media that's just like amazingly negative, because it knows, or the people that are posting it know, that that's what's going to get you to engage. And engagement is what gets their account to be more visible. So we are in this really messed up environment that does the opposite of encourage us to follow our bliss, which is kind of sad considering what a great technology a lot of these things are, like social media and the internet. In some ways, they really are totally allowable for you to follow your bliss through. But we're so much more likely to use them in the negative. And so, no good. You have to be highly aware and conscious of this. And I don't actually have a wonderful solution, because it's all about self-management. Like, how much time are you spending on your phone? How distracted do you keep yourself? Of course, like, one of the things that I think is great is to meditate and to actually try to practice that feeling of being totally just there and not being in that distracted state where it's like, I'm thinking about what I got to do tomorrow. I'm thinking about this thing that I just read. I'm thinking about this event that just happened. I'm thinking about this news that's going on. All of that is pulling away your attention from the thing that you truly care about most. But that thing that you care about is so much less of an urgent feeling than like breaking news, there's a catastrophe that just happened, or whatever. And so when we have all these things competing for our attention, it takes away from the attention that we can spend towards the thing that we are most suited to be doing, like the positive thing, following our bliss. And so meditation is a good way to get around that. Jake is actually currently at a 10-day silent meditation retreat, which is why I had all this chaos getting this live stream started, because I'm doing it all on my own for the first time. And he's out there doing that. He is silent. He's been there. I think he's been there for like 3 days so far, and no contact, like no phones, no contact, no journaling, no talking, just silent meditation for 10 days. So he is going to come back and know what his bliss is. But then, of course, what happens? Like, do you immediately get thrown back into this like super stimulating, distracting environment and just get like sucked back off the path? So we shall see. I don't know if I'm quite ready to go as far as a 10-day silent meditation retreat, though. To be quite honest, there are parts of me that think that sounds absolutely delicious and amazing, and I would love to just go do nothing and turn off my phone for 10 days, because that would be a vacation. That would be, in some sense, a vacation. But we can try to have that vacation in a small way if we just do it in our normal life ourselves for a smaller amount of time. Like, you can have your silent meditation retreat if you just like make everything silent and meditate for a little while. That is a silent meditation. Maybe not so much of a retreat, but same impact. And that impact is what? Quiet, stillness, so that you can do what? Actually hear what is a more important call than the noise, than the kind of like flashy, urgent headlines and the news cycle and the things that are just kind of like bouncing around in our brain that we have to do this tomorrow and, oh, I'm nervous about it. All of that starts to fall away, so that you can find the thing that more subtly but meaningfully pulls at you. And that is often how you find what your bliss is. And that's a very important thing, because like we discussed in the earlier one, that's how you contribute, not just for yourself to have the life that you want, but so that you are a functional person for the people in your life. So now let's get to the fun part of this lecture. We've talked about what following your bliss is, a little bit about how to find that. And another word on that is just like, I don't know, actually try to do it. You know, this is a thing, like, I don't know, like maybe it's just me, but there are so many times where I have this quandary about like, oh, what should I do about this? Or what's going to happen here? Whatever. And it's just like, have you taken an hour to just sit down and actually think about it fully productively? Not like half thinking about it while you take a shower, or while you're cooking, but like dedicated time thinking through, what do I want to do about this? How do I want to solve this? How do I want to address this? It's amazing what intentional focus can unleash, which is clarity and an actual answer and actionable steps to fulfilling that answer. So if you're thinking about, I need to think about what my bliss is, like I want to figure that out and gain some clarity around that because I'm not quite sure, actually just sit down and do it. I swear. I think that is so often the part that we don't want to do. Like, we want to read the books about it. We want to listen to the live stream about it, which I am happy to have you here listening to the live stream about it. But the missing ingredient is the part where you just sit down and think it through and focus on it. That is usually where the true answers come from. So don't skip that part if you're trying to figure out what your bliss is. And now we've talked about the cost, right? So we don't want to risk that becoming like this dysfunctional, unfulfilled person, and then like impacting the people around us, as well as just kind of like wasting our lives, because you don't want to get there. You don't want to get to the end, to the latter part of your life and realize, what was I doing? Why did I spend so much time doing something I really didn't even care about? I think that's so real. And that's another thing that we can distract ourselves from so easily today, because there's just so much going on and we're so busy and there's so much to focus on that's not us and that's out there instead, that we can have years go by where we suddenly kind of realize, oh, why didn't I do this thing earlier? Why did I stay doing that thing for so long? And it's like you were going through the motions. You were in a pattern, and repeating a pattern is an easier thing to do than evaluating the pattern and changing it. And so it's harder to get to there, to realize like I need to reevaluate this pattern that I'm in. I want to make different choices. I don't want to keep doing things the same way I'm doing them. If you're not paying as much attention to that, if you don't have that much empty space to realize, I really don't like how today went. What can I do differently about that? If we're just rushing, and then every time we have spare moments, we fill it with things that make us think about other things in our lives and what we're doing and how our life is going and what we want to actually be doing with it, you're not going to be able to do that kind of self-correction, and you're going to end up years down the road realizing, wow, yeah, I just was repeating the motions and didn't stop for enough time to consider that I didn't actually like the motions I was repeating. So don't end up there. Okay, so let us sum up with the spiritual dimension of following your bliss. This is the part that I think is really interesting to me as a person who is not that religious, because I think it's something that we increasingly need, both in our society and as individuals. And so for Campbell, he saw that following your bliss has this spiritual dimension. So one of the key aspects of this is how it connects you to what he calls the transcendent. And this is a word that I also use to describe higher purpose, the feeling of being connected to something that is bigger than you. And that feeling is often what we get from religion, right? But if you are not a religious person, where do you get that feeling from? Very often, if you are following your bliss, it's from that. It's that you're doing something that is so meaningful that it connects you to that sense of higher purpose and puts you in a relationship to something that's bigger than you. And so that is one of the important parts of being attuned with what you actually care about. And you're not going to get that from hate watching and hate following things that, yes, you care about those things that you're upset about, but they're not going to connect you to the transcendent. And that is one of the key differences with the idea of follow your bliss as following something you care about versus, yes, I care about the news because it's important, but it's not my bliss. And so that's the thing that we don't want to mistake, the differences there. And that's the kind of mistake that I think we are very prone to making today. And you see people make politics their whole identity, and just the news cycle is just what they are consuming all the time, and their conversations revolve around what's going on in the news, what's going on in politics, or whatever it is. And it's just does that make you happy? I mean, for some people, I'm sure that there are those types of people that they just really are into politics in that way. Wonderful. There's got to be those types of people. But I don't think a lot of people are those types of people. I think a lot of people just happen to be consuming tons of news because that's what our social media feeds often feed us now, is news, because news is super engaging. In some ways, we've all just become our parents watching the news and being like, did you see the terrible thing that happened on the news? I remember my parents would watch the nightly news, and it'd be there was a shooting in this neighborhood that you've never heard of and you'll never be in. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. What a terrible thing. I can't believe the world. I was like, you would not know about that if you had not watched the news. You would have gone on with your life completely fine and normal, thinking, wow, all my neighbors are great, everybody's happy, everything's good. But now that you are connected to the news, you know everything bad that happens in the entire world. Every night they are going to make sure to find something bad to let you know about, because that is going to make you feel informed and alarmed. And I got to tune in tomorrow because who knows what's going on, because my gosh, there's a bad thing every day. In some ways, I think we're just doing the same thing. We're getting all our news from social media often, and it all feels important, of course, because in some ways, a lot of things are important. But is it so important that you will exclude the things that truly make you happy, the things that would make a positive difference in your life and in the world if you pursued them, to instead pursue these negative things that you care about? That's the trap that I think so many people are falling into. And so you want to watch that. And that is something that I have to watch too. Oh my gosh. Like, I think that one of the weird things that I've noticed is just the way that social media, particularly like Twitter style social media, like Substack notes and Twitter itself, things like this where you can just kind of react to things that you see on your newsfeed, those things are particularly tricky. Because rather than you coming to social media to express yourself, some thoughts that you had, some things that you actually care about, some things that you've created, it's, I'm going to open social media and be shown something that I can then have a reaction towards, and then I'll share my reaction towards that. That is an entirely different way to use social media than the kind of way that it's, I'm creating things that I share there and then I leave. I interact with the people that I shared the thing with, and then I leave. That's the way that I strive to use it. But of course, that is a way harder way, because every now and then I'm like, I'm bored. Let me just open my phone. And if I'm doing that, it's not because I've got something to share or I'm creating something that I want to promote. It's because I'm filling empty time with what other people are sharing and creating and promoting. And that can be fine. But very often, it leads me to just be in reaction. And then I just want to share the reaction, and then that's that. And so it's a lack of intention around that kind of usage. Like, you can do that, but just you have to be aware, okay, what am I doing, and to the exclusion of what? And that is my big problem with a lot of social media use, is just like, it lets us do this kind of constant reaction cycle. And I think it takes away oftentimes from more meaningful things, bigger things, things that we might actually feel more enthusiastic about engaging with or productive for engaging with. And so that is a kind of usage that I generally avoid. And so let's look at another element here, because that's one of the things about social media and just like the news media that can cut you off from like that transcendent thing. Anything that's telling you like there's people over there and they're bad, there's problems over here, like that's not the transcendent. That's the opposite of the transcendent. That's, oh shit, things are bad. Like, I need to watch myself. I need to worry about the future. Like, that is not that kind of humanistic feeling of like, okay, there is like this higher order to things, and it's a good order. Now, another element that I think is interesting that Campbell ascribes to following your bliss is he says essentially that it puts you in harmony with the universe's deeper patterns. Now, that is up for interpretation, but what I think about that is just like you are in harmony with the environment around you in a way that feels fulfilling and like it's moving you forward. It's like you understand what's going on. You know what I mean? As opposed to when you're frustrated about the way that things are going and you feel like you don't understand what's going on. Like, why is this happening to me? Why can't I get this thing solved? I don't want to be in this situation. Like, I wish this was different. Those are all like kind of really forms of resistance, actually, which ties into the more Eastern philosophy of dealing with the universe, which is not to resist, right? It's like the principle of acceptance. So that's something you hear a lot in Eastern traditions and like Buddhist thought. It's acceptance. So your car breaks down, you might be inclined to immediately think, why is this happening to me? This stupid car, this always happens. Of course this would happen at this time. Like, what is it about my life that is putting me into this situation? Like, why didn't I get the car checked earlier? All these different problems. The Eastern approach would be to accept. the car is already broken. So now you just move forward to fix it. And of course, that's easier said than done. But the idea of following your bliss is that when you're in a place where you're aligned with things that you care about deeply and you're moving towards them, when the problems come up, you are more able to deal with them because you are more in harmony with how life works. So as opposed to a problem being something that just crushes you and like becomes this thing that's much bigger than it actually needs to be, a person who's aligned with their purpose in life, who's moving forward in a meaningful way, also has the tools to deal with those hardships that life throws at us. And I think it's a really true idea. You know, it's just like the more that you are living in alignment with what is good for you, the more that you are capable of dealing with the hard things. When you're not living in alignment, when you're doing things that are kind of just like holding you back or harming you, of course you're going to be less capable of dealing with hardship. And so I think that's part of the way that you can interpret this idea that following your bliss puts you in harmony with the universe's patterns. There's also this like positive element to it, right? Which is just like things start to feel like you're on this journey and like they just kind of make sense. And I've been there every now and then in my life where I'm just like, yeah, I get it. Like I see how my life is this map and I'm following this journey and these hardships get thrown at me, but they are opportunities for transformation. And like it's like the conflict in a story. A story has to have a conflict because if not, it would be a boring story because nothing would happen and the characters wouldn't grow. There would be no evolution. And as humans, we're so drawn to that element in our stories, the idea of transformation, of evolution, of growth, because that's what life is like. That's what we are constantly going through. We're constantly in this state of flux and having things that just continually show up to us, whether it's just like the smallest problem or like whatever it is. Every moment is this potential catalyst for transformation, no matter how small, because we have the choices that we have to make, and those choices lead us to different places. And so that is part of the benefit of being aligned with your bliss, is you are going to be, as he claims, in sync with the universe's deeper patterns. And I like that idea. And so the final thought that I'll leave you with about the spiritual aspect of following your bliss. And I love this because it's so contrary to the idea that, or the misinterpretation that following your bliss is like some kind of hedonistic thing, which is that doing so largely involves being able to serve other people via that bliss that you're following. And that's such a it's such a truism, right? It's just like, oh, when you're doing the thing that you're good at, you're serving others. Like it's the kind of thing that we hear so much that we become numb to. But that is ultimately like one of the deeper aspects of what makes this concept, following your bliss, so meaningful and so important, is that it's not about you. That's not the only person who is impacted when you follow your bliss. Like we spoke at the beginning of this live, one of the costs of not doing that is the negative impacts to the people around you, your family, your friends, your community, so on and so on. When you're kind of like stuck in a place where you're not pursuing the things that you should be pursuing, that you could be pursuing, and you're settling for much less than you're capable of, and you're stuck in these like self-destructive patterns, that is impactful not just on you, but on the people around you. So similarly, the opposite is true when you do follow your bliss. Now you become this positive force in the people around you. And so I think he considers this part of the spiritual component of following your bliss, because there's something, so this is one of the things that this is one of the things that bothers me about like the insistence that the only way to live a constructive moral life is through religion, because it's just so obviously not true to me, because I'm like, hello, like I'm doing fine and I am not religious. So I am evidence to the contrary. It's very weird to have my existence just kind of like dismissed as not evidence to the fact that that's very much not true. And I also think it's just like, it does a disservice to the idea of religion as like, it's like, oh no, it's just a thing that we need to all believe in or we'll all be bad. I think it's actually far more complicated than that. And I think religion offers things that are far more multifaceted and meaningful than just like, you're bad if you don't do this. And so this idea of serving others by following your bliss, by following your purpose, is something that very much aligns with what you hear religious people claim is part of the importance of religion. It's that, well, religion makes you selfless. Religion helps you to serve others and to recognize that it's important to care about others. And without that, you'll just be a hedonist who never cares about other people and only does things to benefit yourself. Well, this idea already puts forth an option to do exactly that without having the faith claim part of religion. And so it's very much within our grasp to live lives that contribute to others without having to believe in faith claims that we can't get ourselves to believe. And so I think it's part of what makes Campbell's work so interesting and important is that he's looked at all these different myths from Eastern cultures, from Western cultures, and found these recurring themes. It's how he came up with the idea of the hero's journey, which is something that's used so much in storytelling, and of course in the most primal kind of storytelling, religion. These myths by which an individual progresses through life in this hero arc, right? They live this fulfilling life. And okay, well, what are the things that they do to live that fulfilling life? And one of the recurring themes is that they are serving others while at the same time pursuing their progress, their growth. And so this is an important part of nuance to that idea of like just self-sacrifice for its sake, which I personally don't like, coming from a more like objectivist Randian perspective on self-interest as being something that is good because it's also good for others when you do what is objectively good for yourself. This idea of following your bliss as also a way that you end up serving others, which gives you this kind of like far more deeper spiritual connection to the wider world, is like such an important part of understanding follow your bliss and like discerning the difference between the kind of like simplified religious instruction to just like serve others always, like just always put yourself last, which I think is a dangerous idea and one that we see kind of weaponized in leftism, where and just collectivism broadly, where the idea that as an individual you have the right to direct your own life and to do the things that are meaningful and important for your well-being, and that actually should always come second to the needs of the group. My view on that is just like, if you're in a group where your well-being must be sacrificed for the benefit of the group, that's a bad group. Your well-being should not be something that is not in the group's interest. And it certainly shouldn't be an obstacle to the group's success. And so on the contrary, like you see in this description of like the follow your bliss idea as something that positions you to better serve others by doing what is best for you, by living a life that is more fulfilling for you, when you are doing this kind of self-interested, objective pursuit of what is good, you are also doing that for others because other people benefit from you living a good, fulfilling life. And if they don't, perhaps it is because they themselves are not living a good, fulfilling life. And that is it for our live stream on following your bliss. Let me know if you have any questions. I'll check the chats briefly. If there's anything that you want me to clarify on this idea, I'm going to read a little bit, I think, from the book also. Oh, we got a comment here. It says, when we connect fully with ourselves, that flows into the world and ultimately helps the whole. Exactly. And it's such a beautiful concept, right? Like, how wonderful that is the case, that we don't need to put ourselves into these positions of like painful sacrifice that harms us for the benefit of others. That's rarely the case. And even when you have these kind of examples of like extreme sacrifice, right? Like, you could talk about the idea of sacrifice in the Christian narrative, right? Like Jesus's sacrifice, like, oh, this is like the most selfless sacrifice. I would argue that it's not. I think it's like a very rational sacrifice to make to save the whole of humanity, and then to become like, to go to heaven and like reign in heaven. It was good for Jesus too. What was Jesus going to do? Be like, nah, I'm going to stick it out here and just not do anything. Jesus would not have then lived through his hero story if he did not make that ultimate sacrifice for the good of others. That sacrifice is actually what made Jesus Jesus. And so, like, you can see even in this idea that often is characterized as like, oh, pure selflessness, like, oh, just sacrifice. He didn't have to do that. It's like, well, if he didn't do that, what was he going to do? Like, just be like, no, screw humanity. I'm going back to heaven or something. Like, that really wasn't, like, that would not make sense for the story. And that's the thing about like the Christian story, the values that are constructed in that. Like, I think there is some misinterpretation that I would think of this idea of like oversimplifying what it means to sacrifice for others. It's not that we harm ourselves for the benefit of others, because who are these others that benefit from us harming ourselves truly? It's rather that we make meaningful, thoughtful sacrifices that align with our values, and those sacrifices allow us to live a life of purpose and benefit others. Like, it makes so much more sense when you add in that nuance. All right, let's check I got one more question here. What if we don't know what our bliss is in terms of doing it in the world? Like, not sure what that would look like. I'm not sure if you were here for the earlier part where I explained a little more about how to find your bliss. So we already went through that, but I'll just like recap, because obviously that's the biggest question, is what the hell is my bliss? How do I figure out what my bliss is, and how do I live that? And so what I like to give the shortest summary possible, part of finding your bliss is going to be shutting out as much noise as possible and taking the time to reconnect with that feeling of bliss, of what really brings you a sense of enthusiasm, joy, and being alive. And one of the examples I gave was music. So I think for a good number of people, they'll feel like, well, I just feel at my best when I'm listening to music. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that you need to run out and become a musician, but are you making time to include music in your day-to-day life? This is something that I've had to realize within myself, which is just like, I enjoy music so much, both as a musician and as a consumer of music, but I rarely make time for it. And then I'm like, oh, I'm not happy. Like, I don't feel great about how today went. It's like, did you even take a minute to listen to music? Or were you listening to podcasts all day in the spare moments? Did you take any time to just dance, to just sit on the couch and just fully relax while listening to music? Do you plan to go to concerts at all? So these are things that I think following your bliss can be part of, which it's like, it's not always, okay, I've got to quit my job and become the leader of a circus because the circus has always brought me so much joy. It can be, okay, let me make more time for some of the things that do bring me that joy without necessarily making my career that thing. And I think what's important about that is, as you make time for the things that truly bring you that sense of enthusiasm and joy and meaning, you will start to get a better sense of where else that lies. Because in many ways, the less familiar we are with it. And so as you get more familiar with that feeling of enthusiasm and joy, that's something that brings you that closer to your bliss elicits, you will be better able to figure out, like, oh, actually, like, maybe I'll do a little more of this. Maybe this is the thing that makes me feel like that. And so then you can discern from, like, okay, I love going to the movies and they make me so happy, but I don't really want to become a film director. Okay, now you're kind of figuring out that path. So I don't think it has to be necessarily this, like, sudden thing where one day it's like, okay, that's it. I've woken up and I realize what my bliss is. Honestly, I think it's a lot harder than that. And I think it's these incremental steps by making time for things that get you closer to that feeling and then seeing where that starts to lead. It can be a trial and error process. And then in terms of living that in the world, that's obviously going to be an individual case. It would be hard for me to give you specific instructions on what that would look like. But I think a good rule of thumb, because like this starts to get into the actual actionable part, which is the hard part. It's really nice to read Campbell and be like, yeah, follow your bliss. That's wonderful. I should do things I love. Love is good. But then you have to do the thing. And then you have to also take out the trash, and you have to do the laundry, and you have to get up and you have to go to work, and you're tired and you're sick and things happen. And it's very easy for that just to like float away. And yeah, I've heard of that idea. I try to make time to watch movies that I like. And then you kind of never really take it further than that. And so part of the problem here is the actual action. And what works best for me, and like generally as a principle, is to turn it into some kind of habit, some kind of thing that you are constantly trying to work towards. Like every day, okay, I set aside 30 minutes to reconnect with my bliss, whatever that is. And I think part of that is just going to be making time to slow down. In my experience, a lot of my realizations of like, oh, damn, I'm not spending any time on the things that are actually truly meaningful to me is because I'm just rushing around. Like I'm just reacting to things. I'm like, oh yeah, I should write this. I need to do this. I should do this. And I'm not really connecting with the work items on a deeper level. And so I'm not feeling them out in terms of like, yeah, I could write that. I could write that essay. But is that what makes me feel like really enthusiastic? Or am I just kind of like mad about this thing and I want to write an essay to make my point about it because I think it's wrong? Like, you know, there's going to be times where I do that. That's fine. It's not like you have to live in your bliss at every time. Sometimes you got to write something or you got to do something because it's just the strategic move. But you don't want your entire life to be those things. And so that's the incremental process of like thinking through what are the things that make me actually more enthusiastic. And a good framework for that also is just like, am I moving further or am I moving closer? Because that is less of this like black and white, like, is this my bliss or is it not? It's just notice how you feel about it. Like if you are, what do you actually want? What actually leads you through these feelings? Let me read the list over so you can get that in case you didn't hear it. So these are some of the things that Campbell recommends in terms of recognizing your bliss. Pay attention to what captures your attention naturally. Notice what makes time seem to disappear when you're doing it. Identify subjects or activities that energize rather than drain you. Recognize experiences that give you a sense of being in the zone, and follow what makes your heart beat faster with excitement and meaning. So those are kind of like the bullet points of what you can use to say, is this leading me closer or further away from what that thing that is my bliss would be? Hope that helps. All right, guys. Oh, I gotta go. It is late. Okay. Thank you for joining. Thank you for bearing with me with the crazy technical difficulties. If you didn't catch the full live stream, I highly recommend you watch it back, because I talk about some of the costs of not following your bliss, and we go into more detail. So that is something that you can find on wetheblacksheep.com. Make sure that you're subscribed there so that you get notified about the next live stream, and so that you can see all the other cool stuff that's there about forging your own path, having the courage and the sense of determination to go in a different direction if that's what you are called to do. All right. Have a good night. Thank you for joining, and I will see you on the next one.